Welcome to the American Theatre Wing seminars on working in the theater. These are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. The American Theatre Wing has a series of programs that we do year-round. We go to hospitals. We bring live theater to hospitals, live entertainment. We go to nursing homes and to AIDS centers, bringing a little bit of magic into the lives of the patients. We also have a Broadway Introduction to Broadway program, which is done in conjunction with the New York City Board of Education and the wonderful generosity of the producers. The producers give us the tickets at a minimal price, and we in turn give these tickets to the students who pay a very, very small price. But part of the program is that they learn to buy a ticket to go to a Broadway show. And this they have done by the thousands. It's a very successful program, and it's a very happy program because it enriches the lives of students. It shows them what theater can bring to them, and it also helps create the audience of the future. We are perhaps known for the Tony Awards, which is a very wonderful honor indeed, and it's the highest honor in the theater. But it isn't given for the longest run, nor for the best review. It is given for the achievement of excellence in the craft of theater. And we're very proud of that distinction. And so it has gone on for years and years since it was first created in honor of Antoinette Perry. We've had seminars on the performance, on the play script and director. We've had a seminar on the production. And today's seminar is on design. The people who bring the magic to theater. In many cases, you see their work, and when it is most successful, you don't see their work. It is a very important part of the theater. It is that which, as I've said, brings the whole thing together and makes theater come alive. Today's seminar on design is chaired by Professor Tish Dace, who is an author and a critic, Patricia Zipprodt, who is a Tony Award costume designer, and Jean Dalrymple, who has done all of those things from author, critic, designer, producer, and I'm proud to say a member of the Board of Directors of the American Theatre Wing. I will introduce Professor Tish Dace, and she will in turn introduce the members of the panel to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mrs. Stevenson. I'd like to introduce costume designer Elizabeth Freed, who recently received her MFA from the Yale Drama School and who has designed, among many other productions, two at the Ridiculous Theatrical Company, Camille, and most recently Brother Truckers, for which she has just won the 1993 American Theatre Wing Costume Design Award. Next, John Arnone, the scenic designer who made a clean sweep of all the 1993 Scene Design Awards by winning not only the Tony Award, but the Drama Desk Award, the Outer Critics Circle Award, and just a few moments ago, the 1993 American Theatre Wing Scene Design Award. He also won that latter award last year as well for his design of Pericles. Then Jean Dalrymple, the legendary Broadway director and producer. Mimi Jordan Sherin, the lighting designer, has just won the 1993 Lighting Design Award for Wojciech at the New York Shakespeare Festival, among many other lighting designs she's done. Another one at that theater, 'Tis Pity She's a Whore, and the Broadway show Our Country's Good. Next, Wendall K. Harrington, who has designed the projections for many Broadway shows, including They're Playing Our Song, the Heidi Chronicles, the Will Rogers Follies, My One and Only, I got that right too, and most recently Tommy, for which she has just won the 1993 Noteworthy Unusual Effects Award for the American Theatre Wing. And also co-chairing with Jean Dalrymple and myself is Patricia Zipprodt, the Broadway costume designer who has won not only Tony Awards in costume designing, but also American Theater Wing Costume Design Awards, and was a nominee for 1993 for My Favorite Year. Thank you all for joining me. I am very eager to find out what sort of budgets you all had. We have here two Broadway designers and a designer from the New York Shakespeare Festival, which has a bit bigger budget than some non-Broadway shows, and a designer from the Ridiculous Theatrical Company who operated, I know, on a very small budget, but I'd love to know a ridiculous budget. How small was it exactly? Do you remember, Elizabeth?
I tried not to keep track, but I think it was about $2,400, and I came in maybe 2 cents under budget.
But I mean, it was difficult, but I kind of like the constraints in a way, in a weird way. I mean, I look forward to having more and more money as I continue in my career, but I really won't look forward to that too hard because I know it's not true. But it does, I mean, the tightness of the budget produced a lot of creativity in terms of going to my friends in the community who aren't working yet on a very high level and who have a lot of ideas on their own, and maximizing their talent. For instance, there was a wonderful collar that Everett Quinton wore, a huge collar, and my friend Chip, before he even read the script, said, "I think that show's going to be about collars. I think you should look at the Mad Queen and Snow White." And that was the only outfit the press photographed. So because I've had to establish all of these connections at a very low level, and friendships, a lot of the creativity comes from all that. And a lot of the collaboration comes from sources outside the theater that's producing the show, and I think that's always good.
That's the way I did when I was 8 years old.
Out in the garage or the barn or that sort of thing? Yeah.
No, in my grandmother's living room, I produced Joseph and his coat of many colors long before anybody in the theater thought of it. And it was a big hit. It cost 10 cents and sold out.
It cost 10 cents for the audience or
For
10
the
cents
audience.
to produce?
Oh, no. Didn't cost anything to produce. I borrowed everything either from my family or the family of the actors. The actors were all 8 and 9 and 10 years old also.
I think that's interesting, you know, because I don't know, I didn't start off as a designer, but as an actor, but as a child, I remember, you produced Joseph in the living room? I did the Nativity out in the backyard quite a bit. And I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but, you know, thrilled at when I could find like a large refrigerator box or a washing machine. Of course, I was about, 2 or 3 or 4 at the time, but I would get the box and put it out in the middle of the yard, and it always had to be on a day that the yard had just been mowed. It was very important that you gathered up all of the cuttings from the day, put it in the box, and then I remember just sitting in the box. And some days I would be Joseph, other days I would be Mary, sometimes I would be one of the animals. But Mother would pass by and she said, "What are you doing in the box?" And I would just silently sit there very still and not say a word. And I don't know where I was. I mean, I don't, having an out-of-body experience, but I would perform the Nativity frequently.
Did you ever play the part of the baby?
Well, Baby Jesus was always in my mind. You know, when you first saw the first creche, the first nativity scene in church, you, as a little child, wanted to go see it. And we went up to the crib, and then in the crib, of course, was a light bulb. So this was very difficult. For a long time, I thought Baby Jesus was a light bulb, and this was distracting. This was distracting. And of course,
I, at about the same age, produced
and starred in Hansel and Gretel. Except I was the stepmother, so I rewrote it, of course, so that was the biggest part. And I also designed the costumes, and I don't think there was any lighting at all. So, but anyway.
What creative children we have here today.
John, you make the nativities sound like there was no action, no plot, no character, only a set.
Well, I think all of that was in my head. I mean, everything. You know, I mean, it's like where we go to do whatever it is we do. I mean, our instinct, our imagination. I mean, I think even though I appeared to be still, there was an entire story, an entire plot. You know, characters were going on, whatnot.
In your head.
In my. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Not very vivant, though, actually.
Also, I think it was a form of meditation. I mean, I think we go in, you know, we have to go to a place, you know, you never want to expect, you come to the studio and you see drawings or you see models or whatnot, but where you have to go, or to Wendall's, it's always a joy to go over to Wendall's and look at the books and see all of the slides being produced, but, and you're fascinated with the material, you know, but what's on the other side of that? I mean, the imagination, the instinct, you have to go, I mean, I think we all, I mean, anyone who, in our field at least, or you know, goes to a place that's very quiet, you know, at some point. I mean, it's a reserve. It's a moment in the day that you take just for yourself, even if it happens in a split second. But in that split second, an entire vision unfolds itself, and it's perhaps hard to describe, or it may seem like nothing's going on. But it's what produces all of the material that people recognize us for what we do.
Before we come back to the subject of budgets, it occurs to me that we really need to find out what Wendall K. Harrington's first production was. Everyone else was out there doing productions in their garages. How about you?
You know, the thing is that I come to the theater from another place. I was a designer in advertising, and so I'm, of all of my friends in the theater, the only one who never grew up thinking I was. Well, I remember in high school that I went to Catholic school, and I tried to convince the nuns that we could in fact put on Marat Sade for the senior play because I had found a bathtub. And that was as good a reason as any. But that was sort of before I had any kind of concept about using projections. Or there was just the bathtub that seemed to be the beginning inspiration. But I came to theater in a way late in life, and now it is my children who are constantly putting on shows in the living room. So I seek inspiration from them. They're living out my childhood that I was busy playing actually Office, I have to admit, when I was a child, which is why I'm so well organized now.
Did you lock yourself in a closet with a typewriter? Did you
No, my father was a printer, so I had a lot of access to like pads and paper. Carbon paper was a big, important
Did you
tool.
lock yourself in a
Oh,
closet
absolutely,
with a typewriter?
absolutely. But you know, you shouldn't underestimate the bathtub in Marat Sade. It's the most difficult prop to create because, I mean, it's this poor actor that's sitting in a tub of water for the entire show, and so he has to be comfortable, you know. So the fittings that we did a production of Marat Sade at the Guthrie, the Christmas show at the Guthrie, and 2 years ago. And I think the fittings for the tub were certainly as complex as any of the costume fittings, you know, were. I mean, there were models that had to be made. His comfort, how he could shift around inside of it, you know, all of that. So if you've got the bathtub, you've got the production, I think.
That's what I thought. There's the point of view. Now, if you've got the bathtub, you've got the production. You heard it here first.
Patricia, did you come to theater as a costume designer through Halloween, or what happened to you?
So I never indulged in Halloween. I don't like to wear costumes. I avoid costume parties. My approach was, I made paper dolls. I designed my own people. I had whole little families. I had villains and gentle people and the whole thing. I clipped plot backgrounds out of my mother's Good Housekeepings and Town and Country or whatever I needed. I'd go through her magazines and I'd get all these things. Then I would invent a little story. And then, having done all of that, and I would, of course, turn on the light, you know, and lots of slides. Having done all of the necessities like that, I would then dress these people in what was right for the occasion, for the plot, for the scenic colors, for the lighting, and all those things, and send them forth on a rainy afternoon in my room or in the attic or wherever I was dispatched to. Oops, excuse me. And then after a certain period of time, I just put all those things away, and by chance, my mother saved them, as mothers do. And many thousands of years later, when she was closing down our house, she was going through the attic. Here are these little envelopes filled with people. And she sent them to me. And I'm fully in the middle of this insane career, this nutty profession of trying to put clothes on people. And out come these paper dolls. And there is the little lady in the yellow dress with the matching parasol and shoes. I regret to say their shoes match their dresses. We don't do that anymore. But anyway. And I suddenly realized where it came from. Where it came from. I was telling stories with clothes when I was like 6 and 7 and 8, you know, whatever age you start cutting up your mother's magazines. And really telling stories. They just weren't in clothes. They were in riding pants for the horse scenes, and for the, if I could find an ocean liner, you should have seen those outfits, you know. And so someone once told me that a person is most blessed when what they're doing as adults has a deep, deep line with things that occupy them natively, generically almost, as children. Because that source, if you tap into that, and I feel I was blessed in a peculiar way, tapping into that, that source is always there, so you don't go stale. You are always refreshed by your work, instead of thinking, oh, I'm tired of this. What do I do next? You do it in another form, but the freshness stays there. And all of us in the theater, I think, have the experience of always being able to refresh ourselves and our crafts and our hopeful arts by tapping these deep, almost like underground streams that never dry up. That's enough of that. Excuse me. But I mean it very passionately.
Patricia, where did you go from the cutting of dolls?
I went to art school of the paintbrush. And
where?
The Art Institute in Chicago. The art classes at my high school in New Trier and Winnetka.
And then from there into costume design? Or?
No, then there to a phase when I was going to be a social worker and solve all the problems. And I worked with juvenile delinquents. I did all the kind of Wellesley College activities. And then I recovered from that and was very restless. I knew I had to do something to get back to my painting and what have you. And I just moved to New York aimlessly. I just knew I had to be here. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And I was painting and ushering at Carnegie Hall and waiting on tables at Traff's and doing all the things that you did in the 50s. And painting and wondering. And one day I had seen 1,000,000 ballets of New York City Ballet. And one night out came the world's most beautiful dress that Karinska had designed. Beautiful romantic tutu, layers of net, silk nets, the colors of which you never think of as theater colors. This was in the 50s, early 50s. And I thought, well, I'll paint with fabric. That's what I'll do. And that's what I did. And that is always my approach into my work, is from just like when I was a little kid and the hunt scene was green, everybody got clothes that looked well in green. Well, I paint myself a little scenic color, rough background, and work out my plots and my scenes with color first. And then I move to character and research and all of that. But so it all keeps going in circles. Yeah.
Elizabeth, did you study, or if?
Well, I'm just wondering if costume designers have this much in common all the time. I come from the Midwest, from Deerfield, Illinois, 10 minutes away from where you're from. I went to Barnard. But I never, another women's school, I never was associated with clothing. I was an investment banker. Well, I started out as a ballet dancer. I was ready to go into the Joffrey Company, and I injured myself and had to quit. And then I went to Barnard in the 80s, and I graduated at the height of the bull market. And the thing to do was to get a job on Wall Street, so I did. And my first question was, how many zeros go on a million? You know, and how do I turn this calculator up? I talked my way into the job. Then I got into Harvard Business School. And
of course.
And I thought, I cannot do this. I want to be a fashion designer. I thought it was fashion. And I moved to Paris. Like you know, I have to be in Paris. I studied at the Chambre syndicale de la couture parisienne for 5 months, and at night ran to an investment banker's office and helped him pick stocks on the New York Stock Exchange. That lasted for 5 months. I couldn't deal with it. I quit school. But during school, I realized that it was the theater. As you said, the seeds from being a ballet dancer. I had a problem with the morality of 7th Avenue. Now I don't. I might go back to it anyway.
But support what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I love the commercial world now. I think it's fascinating. But that was my route. I was in advertising for a while at J. Walter Thompson, and little by little. Yeah, I mean, and it all feeds into the work, though. I mean, it all adds up. Don't you think?
Well, no wonder you know how to manage a small budget. You
I love
were an
numbers. I
investment
love
banker.
money.
You were
Yeah.
investing in stocks and so on. Did you say $400 was your budget?
$2,400.
$2,400. That's not quite so bad.
$2,400.
Mimi, what was your budget for the lighting for Wojciech at the Public Theater?
I have to say I make it a business of mine never to know a budget.
Okay.
It's very
Would
important to
you-
me, and if somebody says it, I start screaming or pretend I haven't heard.
Next
or
question,
something.
related question. If they had said you had an unlimited budget and you could do anything you wanted to do, would you have done anything any differently from that bright white light which lent that eerie, sterile, deathly quality?
No, I wouldn't have.
To the Wojciech that
I
Joanna
really
Gladys
wouldn't have.
directed?
I really designed for a space more than a show, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think my design would have been exactly the same had I known anything. And I really do make it a point not to know. I hope too many producers aren't listening.
That's fun.
That's the answer Tish wondered. How much does money come in?
Yeah. Yes,
And
exactly.
it in fact doesn't. In this particular case, I have to say, in relation to the New York Shakespeare Festival, the money, it seemed to be, the pit was bottomless. I kept asking for things and they kept turning up, and nobody ever said no. And this is not a usual circumstance, but that happened in this particular case. And so I literally did make additions as I went along, but never encountered any problem with it at all. I know it was a miracle.
Wait till you get to Broadway.
In the yeah.
Well, in fact, on Our Country is Good, it was a Broadway Alliance production, and I'm not going to go into that here.
Yeah.
Are there different unions in off Broadway, or did you work with a union?
No.
So
No. In fact, I learned to write my own contract on that show, so that was helpful.
For Tommy, would you care to discuss your budget or at least its effect on the show?
You know, the thing with Tommy was that since we had done it in La Jolla initially on a relatively shoestring budget, I don't remember what the budget exactly was for the projections in Tommy, but we, you know, made a lot of stuff out of things we had available to us that were easy to find, easy to make. And then going to Broadway, we already had a basis for where we were going, only it got to be twice as large and had to look a lot better. So the budget, I would say, quadrupled from what we had. So I think, I can't remember. Do you remember? Ultimately, the budget for the slides for Broadway were like $142,000 to produce. It's over 2,000 slides that are actually in the Broadway version of Tommy.
Had you ever done anything like that before?
Well, I did They're Playing Our Song. It doesn't have 2,000 slides in it, and I've done a number of industrial shows that
That have had that many slides?
I did a 45 projector show that was like the Swedish experience for a theme park in outside of Gothenburg, and I would say that probably had in the vicinity of 3,000 slides in. I mean, it was a large production because, though that seems like a lot of money, that's not a lot of money to work with for theater because of the level of perfection.
Would you explain what the slides were or what they were like?
Well, we've actually got some slides here. Maybe John would like to say a little something about the set before we actually show them. We're lucky enough to have John Arnone, who designed the set for Tommy, and Wendall K. Harrington, who designed the slides, the projections, and I gather that the set got a little bit smaller. Is that true? Because the La Jolla stage was a little bit bigger than the St. James?
The La Jolla stage is large by comparison. It's got almost 40 feet worth of depth, and the St. James doesn't come anywhere near that. The width is fine. But we had, in La Jolla we had a lot more room for projector throw and the distance of the image from the projector to the screen. And at the St. James, it was greatly reduced. So, Wendall came up with a technology and a lens that was able to produce the same thing with a shorter distance, and also quite brilliantly at the same time affected the design and the configuration of the windows or the rear projection screens that we use had to refigure themselves in a way that enhanced the design. Which I was quite pleased to see happen. And the rear projection screens are sort of a universal background windows outside your house, whether you conceive of your house as the four walls you live in or the interior house of your existence, and specifically in this case Tommy's mind. So the rear projection screens are very important in that they not only animate and provide the information that will get you from one scene to the next, but will also give you something of the layering and the experience that young Tommy, this autistic child who can't see, hear, or speak, is having at the same time. Not literally, but in a symbolic sort of way. And at the same time, all of this is orchestrated to the music. So that all of the images, the story all comes out of the music. Nothing happens before the music begins. And also, all of these images and the story is driven by the music. So you were talking about limitations in terms of budget. The great, the music is sort of the framework. Not sort of, it is the framework for the piece. However, these windows refigured themselves for the Broadway production out of necessity. And I think look a lot better than they do in La Jolla, at least metaphorically. They look a lot better, and so that gives you the context for the background for the projections.
I know that we'd all be really interested in how the two of you work together. What's set, what's projections, who decides? Like,
well,
for instance, if I may ask a specific question, maybe we can spring off from that. I know when the father is in the prisoner of war camp, it seemed that you had actual metal for the prison wall. That is, it was barbed wire, I guess. Right. It looked like something that was supposed to represent barbed wire that was clearly a scenic element, and you were projecting along the top panels something to complete the image of the prisoner of war camp. Who decided who was doing what there?
It was just there to be done. So, I mean, there's actually a slide of that if you want to see it.
Yeah, why don't we take a look at some of the slides?
Here, I can just get to.
And perhaps you could talk about who did what as how your slides worked into his set and so forth.
Something that might help you out a little bit on that question is that when we began the designs in La Jolla, we had a very short period of time to produce what became very clear it was going to be a gargantuan amount of work. And Des and I and Pete, began to work with this idea of projections, which none of us were that conversant in or that comfortable with. And the more we convinced ourselves that projections were going to be part of the vocabulary, And given the short amount of time, we realized that we needed to get an expert and someone who knew what they were talking about to handle it, and not just a graduate student. Not that I have anything against graduate students, but I have a few things against graduate students.
The cameras will now be turned off.
Cover your button.
So we called Wendall. I said, Des, we need Wendall. So Wendall came down, and Wendall, I mean, that's what's interesting about the piece. I mean, because we'd all worked together, all knew each other to some extent, and we're all of somewhat, in a generational way, related, and all had worked at the Playhouse, and all had worked with Des. There were common denominators that helped, facilitate a common voice or a common vision. And Des is, very specific. He's God bless him, visually minded, and can, has in his mind, I think, very clear sort of vision of the direction we were to take. And so because we were able to work early on, and because for some reason the pieces fell into place, you aren't able to separate the projections from the set, from the lighting, from the costumes, from the direction, from the acting, from the music. I mean, it's one of those occasions, I think, where it worked, where it all came together. There's a cohesion and a unity of vision, so that when Wendall says it's difficult, I think it is difficult, and we're not being coy or just self-congratulatory. It's very difficult to separate it. I mean, but the process was very specific. I mean.
Just one of the things, because for me this was one of the most interesting things about working in Tommy, was that the color palette came entirely from the costumes for me. Early on, Des and John are working in La Jolla, I'm working in New York, I'm making storyboards and faxing them and having phone conversations, pretty odd way to work with a very short period of time. And most of the scenery was black and white. It's grid, it's an RP screen, there was no, so John, what color? I don't know what color. Call Woolard, I called Woolard. Woolard sent me color chips, scene-by-scene breakdown. This is while he's working on this. This is what I'm thinking of. The doctor scene looks like this little Pantone chips, and this is what it is. So I'd take a look and started to work with those colors to adapt the slides. And we got up to La Jolla, having never seen a piece of clothing that he had done, and he hadn't seen anything that he was not privy to the storyboard conversations. Costume designers generally left out of that, right? I know. Suddenly we end up in La Jolla. The image goes up. The first day of the costumes come under. It was the top of the second act. Is this laundromat, big yellow and blue laundry machines. The clothes walk out. They are perfect. It vibrated because it was exactly dead on. And the great thing for me was that there's a lot of very odd imagery in Tommy. Things get warped. We're looking at the world through an autistic child's vision. I struggled with how to make that as odd as possible and still make it acceptable. And the thing that happened was, as I understood what happened when the costumes walked out in front of that odd imagery, it was grounded. It stood up, didn't matter what it was. Just, raw egg would have been right if the clothes and everything else seemed to ground it. And that was, for me, that was the most exciting part of the collaboration, because I never really worked that closely with a costume designer before, but also that lesson of how color, for me, working with lighting designers is quite frequent, what gels you're using, what color you're using in the scene. This I understand. But that idea that you make the whole world vibrate in unity, because everything is the same color, or you're working together. Or maybe it's not the same color. You say, oh, you're going this way, I'll go that way, because, if you're red and I'm green, it's going to, this is going to shake for everybody in the house. That was a great,
it's
great
very
experience.
often a happy mistake, too. So many things are not planned that look planned. And, you turn around and go to the costume designer. Good color you chose. I chose it, too, I find that's true all the time, especially if you work with people over and over again. You tend to, not that they do the same things at all, you just tend to get to know each other and feel each other out.
What's the ABCs of putting this all together? Who comes first on the production? Set designer, costume designer?
I would say set designer.
Where does the director, the producer come into this? Who's
Well, I mean, I can use an example right now. I'm doing a couple productions that are at the beginning of the design, and I don't have a lighting designer. I've met with a costume designer, and we've shocked them into next week, but because of the color palette. But there's no lighting designer yet, and it's scaring me because I know, you know, when I have to accommodate them in terms of positions, and I've designed lights myself, and just from experience know that there at least have to be, you know, these positions here, here, and here, and here, and here, if anyone's going to see anything, especially if it's a dance piece, if it's which this one piece I'm doing right now is, it's the tour of Greece that's going to go out and come back to New York in the summer. But we don't have a lighting designer right now, and I'm on the phone to the producers every day saying, we've got to make a choice. We've got to make a choice, because I'm going to bids on Thursday with it, and I'm afraid I'm going to bids with incomplete information.
What happened before there were lighting designers as such in the theater? Jean's time, for example, you didn't have something called a lighting designer. There was the electrician that turned on the lights.
Essentially, you had a
technician. I like some pink
or
instead.
a stage manager. I mean,
Stage manager.
literally.
Don't forget Joe Malzina, who always did his lighting, and Boris started out
Right.
having to do lighting. I mean, your predecessors, all our predecessors, had to deal with that. There were no costume designers either.
Wasn't
You
there
know.
just a single union exam, so
Yes.
people really had to master the
Early
various
days.
skills?
It's also a question of volume. I mean, I know I had tried, when I first started designing, I did lights for a few shows, I did costumes for a few shows, and it got to the point where it was just too much.
Yeah,
Not only
it's
was it's overwhelming, but also you begin to recognize the fact that the idea of collaboration in the theater is so limited to begin with. I mean, you know, you have this sort of idea that it's, well, you were asking, it's three designers and a director, and they're all hidden away in some sort of cave, and you never see who they are. And it's one thing I've been thinking a lot about in the past 3 years, and to try and just change the direction of how we work, or at least how I work. I mean, I can't do it for anybody else, but I've sort of made somewhat of a commitment to try and clear my schedule so I can be there for as much of the rehearsal period as possible, and be there every day, and start part of the day off at the studio, but then go to the check-in at rehearsal every day, just to sort of get a little bit of you know, not only to feel like you're participating in the creation of the actual event, but that you're not such a stranger, like the actors never know who you are, and you can't remember their names, you know, and then it all comes together magically somehow, and I'm thinking, who's fooling who? You know, that's simply not the way it works, and we always are, because we have to work multiple jobs. I mean, you know, throughout your career, you don't get the luxury of doing this, and I'm not saying I get to work this way exclusively. I don't. None of us do. But I find as when I can, I try and spend more time in the rehearsal period.
Theater.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of see what's going on, and as Wendall was saying, like, what's the color going to be? Well, you ask yourself, how do you, form those decisions just from reading the script and just from talking to the director or talking to, I mean, if you're actually in the rehearsal process to some extent, I think that adds to your ability to choose.
Definitely.
You know.
In Tommy, it must have been complicated by the fact that there wasn't exactly a script, was there? I mean, the people who give the directives in Tommy, I suppose the particular person would be Des McAnuff, who directed it and co-authored the script, but then it's a sung-through show. So Pete Townsend composed it and co-authored the script with Des as they put together a sort of new storyline for it. But it must have been tough working with that. It seems to me that the designers of Tommy conveyed the plot and the emotional impact, the characterizations, the situations, just as much, if not more, than the lyrics and the music and what the actors were doing. Could you tell us how that worked with these slides? There's a tantalizing slide over there on the projector showing.
Well, actually, the thing is that in the overture, I can run through some of those slides in the beginning. We go through the whole, the Mr. and Mrs. Walker, they meet, they marry, they're separated. all of that is told wordlessly in the
all visual
overture
imagery.
of Tommy. It's done through action. They meet. She's working, making an airplane. They go to a dance. So this all happens. What? How long does the whole thing take?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. They go to a dance. They dance. Next thing you know, it's a church. They get married. They go home. He kisses her goodbye. He gets up in an airplane, jumps through a hole in the floor, and lo and behold, comes flying in behind a scrim, only to be shot by Germans. So it's a very sad thing.
You watch the actors, you hear the music, you see the scenery,
you
the
see
lighting, the
like-
costumes, and the projections. Visual and then the music.
Then you see this scene here. He's gone to clearly a prison camp, and someone comes out and sings, "It's a boy, Mrs. Walker, it's a boy," and there you are. This really the first real music of the. Oh, I guess Captain Walker didn't come home. Yeah, that comes first.
How long did it take to put that 7 minutes together?
Good
I mean,
question.
besides your whole life. I mean, you know.
Well, John and Des had pretty much had an idea about what
worked on
that before I even came on board
Right,
about
you
what
said
was going to happen.
There wasn't a script. I mean, I was living in Los Angeles at the time and was commuting. The commute from Los Angeles to La Jolla would simply be listening to the music, and would go to Des's home, and there wasn't any script. I mean, he would just talk me through it. And one day we sat down and said, okay, now we have to do the prologue. We have to do the introduction. And it worked out the storyline, the information that we wanted, and said, okay, well, for this, you know, how can we represent this in not only the most economic way possible, but also how can you get rid of that image and bring a new image to bear, you know, for the next sequence and tell the story as you go visually. But I mean, but also it's important to note that the music all through this is really what's driving these images. I mean, that without the music, these images wouldn't appear. The story wouldn't appear. I mean, so you say there's no script, but there is a script, and it's the music, and you just you sense it. I mean, even the rhythm, the pulse, the tone, the melody, whatever is there is very real. I mean, that's what I mean. If we recognize anything, you know, in terms of the quality of the piece, it's all born from the music.
Did you have something to listen to? Because the album, of course, has been rearranged. Plus, you got one new song.
Yeah.
But the order of the songs in the album.
Well, it was, you know, you
quite
jumped
different.
around listening to it on the album, and then you'd have to like you'd have to pull over to the side of the road when you had some emotional recall from a, you know,
As you were shuttling back and forth
yeah.
between LA and
I
San
had
Diego.
not listened to the music. Absolutely. I had not listened to the music since college days, and I remember, you know, I mean, I can't get it into, I won't get into it specifically because it's too personal, but there was very personal responses in my life to certain sequences in the music that I had not listened to in a long time. And all I had to do was hear the musical phrase, and I was off to the side of the road, just boo-hooing, you know, just like, it was very,
It was very
deep.
interesting having that on Broadway, too. It was a very exciting thing.
It's very difficult to watch the show. I mean, what's nice is to go back and watch the show, if you, which I do, because while we were working on it and in tech rehearsals, and I'm sure everyone can attest to this, it's the least enjoyable event in your life. I mean, a musical or something sort of entertaining. I mean, I know when we were doing Candide at the Guthrie, Garland said, "Isn't this the worst experience you've ever been through in your life?"
Why are we doing this to
Yes, why do you
ourselves?
do this? I mean, it's very difficult. It's arduous. It's you think, how many am I going to kill an actor today? You know, or yeah.
But that's very interesting. Patricia, how often do you go back and look at the costumes of a show after it's been on, had a run? Or don't you, or do you?
Oh, I do. I think in a funny way we all have to patrol. I look upon myself as patrol. Because,
Whose responsibility is that, as a matter of fact?
well, I think for all of us, each department head who's maintaining the show in the theater is their responsibility. But the beyond that technical point responsibility lies with the designers to see that everyone is not letting the show slip. I know that, I'll give you a silly example. It goes back thousands of years to a show called Fiddler on the Roof. And I began to watch, and we had, oh, I don't want to discuss how the hands-on of the making of those clothes. But I began to watch it sort of drain in color and drain in color. And I'd go backstage, and the wardrobe people were fabulous. They were scanning. Everything was clean and hung up and this and that, and there were no complaints. I thought, something's the matter. And it took me about a year and a half to suddenly realize they were being dry cleaned. And I thought, but most of it's cotton or silk, and all this stuff is sort of slowly accumulating that is not cleaned out. So I said, it has to be washed. Washed? They mean it would have to wash it. I mean, that, good God. So we began a little process called, we'll take it back to the shop, and we had big barrels filled with soap and water, and I'd take it blouse by blouse, and skirt by skirt, and apron, and I would watch the colors come back to the original colors. And if for any reason during the dry cleaning process they had dropped, we dyed them over again. Put them into the tin sacks, because we kept records, and they went back, and slowly the show came up to this feeling of ghetto peasant, rural, pressed down people who still sparkled in their souls, and therefore in their hankies and their little scarves. These little clarities of color could puncture through. But what I was doing was watching it get dimmer and not really seeing it, because if you watch it, you don't see these subtle shifts.
Well, I did as a producer, and I considered it up to me to make sure that it was always sparkling. And my productions ran a long time.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's why you're Jean Dalrymple. You know, it's true. I mean, that kind of passion and love for the craft of maintenance.
Yeah.
What about
It's
today?
remarkable.
Do you still go back today on a large production, or are you busy doing something else?
Well, both. Both.
Elizabeth, Brother Truckers ran, what, maybe 6 weeks or something like that?
Actually, the run was extended. I think it ran several months, and then it went to England and then to the Edinburgh Festival.
So did you have that kind of responsibility for upkeep?
I couldn't bear to look.
They had to take care of it themselves.
Yeah, and there's a wonderful wardrobe mistress, but there's not enough money to properly maintain a staff that could properly maintain the clothing. So no, that's why I didn't bring anything.
How many costumes did you? How many costumes did you have to construct for that show? It wasn't a very large cast, but it seems to me they switched costumes.
Yeah, because drag queens love to wear different clothes.
Right.
You know? I mean, that's what's so great for a costume design. That's why I do so much drag work, because they don't care about the character. They just want to look fabulous. And there's a costume change every time you blink. So as much as you don't keep track of the budget, I don't know how many clothes there were. I just kept doing them.
Well, there were 4 performers who cross-dressed. I guess there were 2 women playing men and 2 men playing women in Brother Truckers.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Is there a particular challenge to designing for the opposite sex to what the character is? Little things that you have to do differently?
Yes, there are little tricks that you have to do with undergarments, particularly. Well, for a man going into a woman's body, often you'll pad the hips or pad the bust, and it's a major drag queen decision whether to shave or not, whether you want that total illusion of change. Charles Ludlam, I think, never shaved. Never shaved because it was all up here, and I will always regret never having seen him on stage. Everett doesn't shave. I understand he was amazing.
Camille.
Absolutely.
Astonishing.
Yes.
I mean, I remember that being one of the first Joanne Acolytis dressed like an egg, Charles Ludlam doing Camille were like, I think, what launched me into New York, you know. And the Camille was, it's just, you know, you just like look at people that haven't seen it and you go, sorry.
Well, they revived.
I'm not even going to try. I'm not even going to try to describe it.
They revived the Camille for Everett. Everett played Camille differently, and Elizabeth Reed did the costumes for that, and they were remarkable. They were so funny, the costumes, and yet they fit when the mood shifts. You know, there's this wonderful tension in Camille between it being hilariously over the top, and then the pathos of the original story taking hold, and when it needed to be sad, the costumes were sad.
And I think Everett did.
Yeah, but what we were talking about at the beginning of this afternoon was, you know, doing stuff in your living room, doing, you know, he's someone who never left his living room.
Exactly.
He never left the living room.
You know, just a living room.
And you felt that you were on his turf, and it was the most delightful experience. Yeah.
Well, I always thought that Levin's costumes were among the best in the world, and the ones that Everett did. And I think you are such a lucky person to inherit that area, because the work was absolutely top, just of the best.
Yeah.
Wendell, do you think you could show us the slides of the pinball wizard section? I'm sure everybody would really like to, if you can cut.
Actually, there's...
What did you bring us?
Here.
Oh, well, you got the mirror, the wardrobe
the
with the
wardrobe,
mirror
you
on
should see
front.
the fabulous wardrobe, but we don't want to tell anybody about this who hasn't seen it, then we'll give away the plot.
I see.
There's a scene that takes place in a courtroom, and
Those are your wildest slides, I think.
where the
section.
flag melts, which is one of my favorite things. It's one of the things that I experimented with early on, and trying to think of how to approach the artwork for Tommy was actually photographing in reflections and trying to melt imagery, and that was very unsuccessful in my studio. But anyway, with a computer you can do it. It's a lot easier. These are the fabulous John Arnone doors that have won the choreographic award. It wasn't really the dancers that won that Tony. It was the doors. It was the dancing doors, the freestanding dancing doors.
Well, the pinball machine that dances, too, is quite miraculous.
And here are the fabulous CAT scan machines. And the illuminated doorway. I don't have any of the... It's the last one I have. This is at the end where Tommy has become so famous that his face is everywhere, which is an interesting dilemma, because you could not use the actor's face, because if he got sick or was replaced, it would become a very expensive process. So in La Jolla, we actually used the actor's face, because we thought, well, it's only a couple of weeks, he'll be fine. And but on Broadway,
there's the hand in front of the face.
I was really, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?
And the shadow profiles. And
so that was why we came up with that idea. So otherwise,
two sets of...
You could, you just wouldn't want to go to the effort of having to change. It's 18 screens. Every single image is 18 slides. So,
Where were the screens created?
the screen is it's actually one big piece of screen material. It's just divided up into 18 different screens.
Oh my God, I have to go see this.
I'm like the only one in the world who hasn't seen it.
I was so sad about that. We'll get there now.
But that's the last of the slides that I have.
John Arnone, you won our award last year, as well as this year, for Pericles. And you live in California, you work all over the world, it seems. You weren't able to come. Your director, Michael Greif, came and represented you admirably. But I've been dying to know all these months the answer to a question. On the set of Pericles, the terracotta wall, the fragmented terracotta wall, had handprints all over it.
Right.
Does this in some way convey the thematic material of Pericles, about losing and regaining, about life and death and so forth? I mean, was this a set metaphor, or what exactly inspired you to put those handprints all over that set?
I think it has more to do with my subscription to National Geographic magazine than anything quite. I mean, it's an image that we saw. It's about presence. It's about witnessing. It's about the idea of what you're talking about is a wall in which there are a lot of white, sort of ghost handprints. And it's simply an image of a silent witness, of people that have been present at one time, who are no longer there to tell the story, but are there to bear witness to the story. So even though you see like one person on stage, you get a sense that there is an echo, there's a depth, there is a historical recurrence, a multitude that has visited this plot, this point in time before. basically it's about witnessing, I think, and testifying to one's being around for the event.
Would be nice to have a program note about that.
Well, some theaters, do have liner notes. Great, put their dramaturgs to the task, and that's always exciting to have that. I mean, I know when
I think it is.
Yeah.
Well, most theaters, except for the Broadway theater, do provide that kind of surround of information.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Mimi, are you inspired to go back and do another Broadway show after hearing Wendall and John talk about Tommy, or are you just as happy working on your infinite budgets in smaller theaters?
Well, that's an easy answer. I've only done one Broadway show, and it was under the Broadway Alliance, so I can't say I've really done a Broadway show, if you will.
Are you eager to? Would
No.
you like the challenge?
No is the answer. A lot of politics.
No.
A lot of politics.
Harder and harder, less fun.
And I find regional theater and regional opera and international opera the place I'm most comfortable in.
What are you working on right now?
About 12 shows. I'm doing the next 2 shows at Hartford Stage. I just came from Baltimore Center Stage, and I'm doing opera in Houston, Dallas, Edmonton, Munich, San Diego, blah, blah, blah. And it's I'm sort of in the opposite place where John is in a way, because I would absolutely love, I think, once in my life to be able to go to a place and actually be a part of the long process. But I'm in hit and run. I mean, I literally come in, never know anybody's name or anything.
Could we go around and find out what everybody's working on now?
Well, I think we've heard from Mimi.
Yeah, my next show is it's called Keeley and Dew, and it's at Hartford Stage.
Wendell?
I'm doing Night and Her Stars, the new Richard Greenberg play at South Coast Rep.
Patricia?
On December 9th, My Fair Lady, a whole new way of looking at it, we hope, will grace the stage of the Virginia. It's been out on tour. I'm also working on something that has me completely enthralled and has had me enthralled for the last 5 years. It's a black musical theater opera having been written by a man named Walter Robinson. It will have a very, very definitive run for a week up at the Wang Center this January, hopefully to launch it into regional or Broadway or good off-Broadway homes.
Elizabeth?
I'm working on Fences at Center Stage.
And John?
Len Jenkins' Careless Love at Soho Rep, and the Tour of Greece that's going to go out in January.
Is that what it's called, or are you touring Greece?
Greece.
Oh,
The
Greece.
tour.
Greece.
Oh,
The
Greece.
tour.
Oh, yes.
Greece the musical.
Touring Greece.
It's not by design.
Post-apocalyptic Greece.
I'm sorry. It really is not by design. But I am going to have to bring this to a close, and this has been the American Theatre Wing seminar. I'm working in the theaters, and this seminar is on design. The people that bring the whole magic to you. You come into the theater, and before you unfolds lights, music, costumes, sets, and you're in another world. There is nothing like it. And these people on the panel today have all been recipients of the American Theatre Wing's Design Award, which goes to both off-Broadway and Broadway. I'm Isabel Stevenson, and I'm president of the American Theatre Wing, and the seminars are coming to you from the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. Thank you for being here, and thank you, wonderful, creative, designing panel.
I'm sort of in the opposite place where John is in a way, because I would absolutely love, I think, once in my life,